I'm so happy. Also, because we're about to lose you to maternity leave. Is that right?
Yeah, 3 more weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Very excited. Very excited for this new chapter. But yeah, excited that we got to squeeze it in before then.
Yes. And so, everyone, if you have a comment or a question, please leave it. We will address it. This is your time. Tell us where you're from. Tell us what you're up to. We're really excited. Um, I am going to ask Kristina some questions just so you get to know her. We'll set it up a little bit. And then as questions come in, we will address them, right? And Kristina, before I ask you to tell us a little bit about you and your work, I just want to say that, for me, the issue of body image and disordered eating and even exercise compulsion has been, unfortunately, just a piece of my life since I don't know, since I was probably 9 years old, unfortunately. And I think that's not an uncommon story for many of us. You're nodding your head vigorously. I was remarking, I'm an American cisgendered white woman in her 40s. I've been on a diet for decades. And, food is never food, I think, for so many of us. I'll never forget, I interviewed Melissa Gerson, who's an eating disorders therapist, and she said, even eating disorders serve a function. They serve a function in our psyche, in our lives. And so I think it's important to take them seriously. And today I would love to sort of talk about how our body image and even those disordered eating desires, exercise, how it all shows up at work in our professional identity, because I think it's really profound. So, Kristina, first, I would love to introduce you. You're the CEO and co-founder of Equip Health, which is an amazing mental health focused startup that offers family focused wraparound care for families who have someone struggling with an eating disorder. Why did you start this business?
Yeah, well, so grateful to be here. And thank you for sharing your own personal story as well. I think, unfortunately, it is not at all uncommon. And the majority of us, especially women, not that these pressures don't happen to men because they absolutely do, but really struggle with food and body image in this world that we live in, which makes recovery from an eating disorder so hard because you enter a world that is so disordered. So we'll get into that. But to answer your question, I joke that I've been kind of in this field for my whole entire life. I was diagnosed with anorexia at 10 years old, struggled throughout my adolescence, was spent my entire freshman year of high school, not in high school, in and out of 4 different hospitals for a total of 7 months. Got out, inevitably started to slip because I didn't know how to take care of myself, nor did my family. And doctors told my parents, send her to a long-term facility across the country. Don't have a lot of hope for recovery. People really don't recover from these disorders. Very grateful that they did not listen to that and instead dove into the research and found out about family-based treatment, which we now know is the leading and really only evidence-based treatment for kids, adolescents, and young adults with eating disorders. And it essentially understands at a high level that eating disorders are brain disorders. They have some of the strongest genetic and neurobiological underpinnings of any mental illness. And, I often say for an illness that requires you to fight your brain upwards of 6 times a day, it's not only ineffective, but kind of mean actually to treat it as an individual illness. You really need people around you to help you with that. And so that's what it does. It takes the healthy people in the home to structure the home for pro health. And it was the hardest year of my life, but undoubtedly the thing that got me better. And in my recovery, we actually talk a lot about how the temperament traits that make you vulnerable to an eating disorder, which I think a lot of folks who follow you will relate to, this kind of perfectionism, anxiety, type A personality, the ability to hyper focus on a goal, narrow out distractions. These are actually awesome temperament traits when you learn how to not channel them against yourself and channel them into the right direction. And so I think that was certainly my story and the story of so many who I work with. I learned quickly how grossly inequitable and inaccessible this field is, with 80% of the 30 million Americans who struggle with an eating disorder not able to get treatment, and have really dedicated my life to fixing that. So at 15, I started a nonprofit called Project Heal, which grew into one of the largest grassroots eating disorder nonprofits in the country, really focused on barriers to treatment access, and really kind of grew up in this field, learning from some of the leading clinicians and academics, and then, perhaps more importantly, thousands and thousands of patients and families who'd been mostly not well served by the current system. After many, a decade plus of trying to solve this problem in the nonprofit space alone, had decided that we really just needed to move faster and needed more investment to drive the truly transformational change that was needed in this field. And so started Equip just about 4 years ago to really make sure that every single person had access to not only treatment, but treatment that really works and
works.
Is effective.
And did you raise venture capital?
I did. Yeah. I had been, one of the things that's really hard about the eating disorder nonprofit field is that eating disorder nonprofits collectively raise less than $10 million per year.
Wow.
Yeah, that's all. And I think so much of that goes back to, there is still a stigma and stereotype that eating disorders are a white rich girl vanity issue, which could not be further from the truth. We know that eating disorders don't discriminate. They affect folks equally across race, class, ethnicity. Up to 40% of those who struggle identify as boys and men. The transgender and non-binary community struggles at 5 times the rate of the cisgender community. Most folks are not underweight. You can't tell just by looking at them. As food insecurity rises, eating disorders directly rise. And they're the second deadliest mental illness. It is crazy how few people really understand eating disorders, but I think that stigma and that, blame and sort of underappreciation really leads to that lack of funding. So basically decided it was going to be really hard to create that sort of transformational change. And my co-founder, who was working in academia, similarly, it is the lowest funded, next to borderline personality disorder, of all mental illnesses in the research community by the NIMH. So we had both been trying to solve this problem in nonprofit and academia for a really long time, and just said, we have to move faster. One person is dying of an eating disorder literally every 52 minutes. We got to try something new. And so we're fortunate to raise venture capital from really phenomenal mission-driven investors, which really helped us to scale pretty phenomenally. And so today we serve folks across all 50 states. We actually are just in the process of opening our doors to the adult population. So have been serving folks ages 6 to 24, but are just opening our doors beyond 24. So everyone can get treatment. And we work with insurance companies. Right now, about 115 million Americans have full access to coverage for a year or more. So a third of the country, and I'm working every day to get that, accessible to the entire country, but really educating insurance companies on, you need good, lasting, sustainable treatment, a year or more. And then the way we structure it is really folks having unlimited access to sessions and messaging with this multidisciplinary care team so that they're able to work on the eating disorder, the comorbidities, which, you never have an eating disorder without anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, like it all comes in together. And then, a lot of recovery, and mentioned this at the beginning, what makes recovery is so hard for so many reasons, but one of the reasons it's particularly hard is that you have to be prepared to come back into this world that is so disordered and fight, this very normalized diet culture that we've all been swimming in. And I think that's a really, really critical piece of the puzzle that we try to work on at Equip, not only with individuals, but also with their loved ones and their community, because that is ultimately the best way to really help inoculate folks against this, is to help them build up that community around them that can really fight back.
I want to pick up on the thread of, it's interesting. NPR's On Point did a great episode a couple days ago that I want to recommend to listeners. And basically, it's hosts of a podcast who I think it's called We Need to Talk About Food, or We Need to Have a Better Relationship with Food. And they pointed out that actually anorexia, which is what you had, is rare it's a rarer eating disorder. The most common eating disorder is binge eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a higher prevalence than bulimia and anorexia combined.
Yeah.
And it's not glamorous, you know? I mean, I think that in our diet and thin obsessed culture, unfortunately, we have so many stereotypes about what someone with an eating disorder looks like.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really important. But I want to talk a little bit about anxiety. I gave a talk at your company, which was such a joy to meet your clinicians and your team. And you came up to me and you said, I'm an anxious achiever. You did go to Harvard, I should point out. Uh, what about anxiety and disordered eating go together like peanut butter and jelly?
Oh my goodness. I mean, many people think that, eating disorders are really kind of a reflection and a manifestation of the anxiety, but
Yeah.
certainly a lot of the, compulsivity that folks feel, the rumination around food and disordered eating, they just, it's very, very hard to tease out for many folks what starts first, because we also know that getting into a state of malnutrition increases anxiety. That's actually a really important point that I want to touch on. A lot of folks don't know that, being in a state of malnutrition and weighing even like 5 to 10 pounds less than your body wants to be naturally, and this is not according to the BMI chart, it's like our bodies all want to be at different places, really greatly increases anxiety. And then we also know that a lot of people who are predisposed to anxiety, also manifest having eating disorders. But, for me, certainly anxiety was something that I think was there before the eating disorder and continues to be there after the eating disorder, and something that I actively manage, something that, again, is highly genetic. I come from a family of, I would say, anxious overachievers. And it was really one of the things we talk about in treatment is really understanding these temperament traits and not seeing them as a death sentence or something that means you have to be sick forever, but really understanding, like, I am probably always going to be an anxious achiever, a bit of a perfectionist. And I think, look, you can do work to ramp that down such that, maybe where I was a 9 out of 10, I can bring myself down to a 6 or 7 out of 10 with, I talk very openly about, I am on Zoloft. I engage in therapy in and out in my life when I need it. I have a regular yoga practice. I try to have a regular meditation practice. There are things that I do to ramp that number down, but I'm probably never going to be someone who's like a 2 on that scale.
Right.
And that's okay. It just means that I channel that into, things that I'm really passionate about. And, starting both projects.
Well, the fact that you're a startup CEO and a founder, is actually probably a great place for that anxiety. But, there is emerging data that people who are sort of on this side of the spectrum are more likely to become founders and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I just want to touch, I see a comment from Coney. It has not disconnected, I don't think, for us. If anyone else has disconnected, please let us know. Please jump in with helpful questions, non-judging questions. This is not a judgmental place. And I also want to say this is not a place where we can offer medical advice or therapeutic advice. We are just having a discussion. And if you need treatment, I think, Kristina, maybe at the end, we can offer some places where people can go.
And Maura, I just wanted to jump in on something you said before that, which was just re-emphasizing that, yes, binge eating disorder is actually the most common eating disorder. And something that folks don't realize about binge eating disorder is all eating disorders really stem from restriction. And so that is at the core of it. For folks with binge eating disorder, that is stemming from diet culture restriction. And our bodies are smart. When you put your body into a state of malnutrition and starvation, for a very, very small few amount of people with anorexia nervosa restricting type, they will continue. But for the large majority of people, our bodies are smart. Our bodies want to keep us alive. And so that period of restriction is what leads to this period of binging, binging. And then it is this cycle of, I feel so crappy about myself. Now I'm going to go back on this restrict cycle, and it gets you into this binge and restrict cycle. So actually a lot of the, same treatment for binge eating disorder is fighting this diet culture and teaching people to eat on a more regular schedule and not starve themselves, not restrict themselves. The other thing is that actually, a lot of most people with eating disorders, it's probably about equivalent binge eating disorder and this quote eating disorder not otherwise specified category. And what we've learned, and this is only in the last less than 10 years, is that most folks who are falling into that category had all of the hallmark symptoms of anorexia, with, psychologically, medically. We used to have a weight criteria in an anorexia where you had to be under a certain arbitrary BMI cutoff. And across the country realized, oh my God, the majority of people with eating disorders have all of the symptoms of anorexia. They're just not in a, technically underweight body on the BMI scale. We've been missing all of these folks. So really just to reemphasize the point that 2 points, maybe all eating disorders stem from restriction. And you cannot tell just by looking at somebody if they have an eating disorder and even what eating disorder they have, right? We have folks across body shapes and sizes with all of these different eating disorders.
That's really interesting. Well, let's talk about our disordered culture and how it might inspire that cycle of inspiring. I think one of the things that we don't think about, even if you don't have a classic eating disorder, I would like anyone in the audience to step back and think about, how many minutes a day do I think about my body and how it looks? Am I angry at my body? Am I thinking about what I should eat? Am I thinking about what I did eat and feeling bad about it? Am I planning what I'm going to eat? How much time is your brain devoting to that? How much sort of rumination is your brain devoting? And do you feel good about that? Like, if you're like, yes, this is good, this is what I want to do, great. If, like me, you sometimes think about it and you're kind of like, this is terrifying. What a waste of my brain space.
Yeah.
Right. So I just want everyone to think about that. How often, Kristina, do you have anything to say about that? If someone thinks
love
about it
that
frequently.
you phrase it in that way, because that's actually what we say when, and folks come in, a big part of an eating disorder is ambivalence about recovery and not knowing how sick you are. Every single person who struggles with an eating disorder struggles with these things. And so when folks are kind of thinking about seeking treatment, one of the big things that we talk about is, I don't actually, at the end of the day, like, I don't care what you weigh. I don't care what you're eating. At the end of the day, this is what I care about. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being never at all and 10 being every single waking second, how often are you thinking about food in your body? And then how often do you want to be thinking about food in your body? And it's that delta. We are trying to reclaim that brain space. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of folks, even if they're not at that 10 out of 10, I don't know too many people in this world who are on a 1, right, in our society. And that is a bummer, because it is just such a waste when you think about how much time we could be devoting to other, important, there's so many important things going on in the world that we could be devoting our brain space to. And it's so unfortunate that we devote it to food and body, especially given that we know that bodies come in all shapes and sizes, and weight is a really poor proxy for health. And also 95% of diets fail.
Right.
And most dieters end up regaining that same weight or even more weight. And so it's a futile task. And we have to remember that there is a really massive, rich industry that is profiting off of us continuing to think about food in our body a 10 out of 10 and thinking that we can do things to change it.
How often a day do your thoughts wander now?
I am so fortunate in that I have, had so many incredible years of treatment, and then have been in this incredible community of like-minded folks who are fighting back actively against diet culture. And so I can honestly say, I think I am on a 1 or a 2. I get, excited about my husband and I are planning our anniversary dinner for Saturday. And so it's more in the sense of like, I'm excited about which nice restaurant are we going to try? And especially before having this kid, like,
of course,
what are some things that we can do and dining out before that happens. But, for me, like, it really has simmered down to a 1 or a 2. I will also say, though, and put the important caveat that I have thin privilege. I was fortunate to recover into, and I shouldn't even say fortunate, that's a, diet culture qualifier. I recovered into a, societally acceptable, smaller body. And so I am not feeling that weight stigma, that fat phobia. For a lot of people with eating disorders who recover into, fat, self-proclaimed fat bodies, they've really educated me on the fact that it is a daily consistent act for them when they recover into this world that is actively, hateful of and shaming of their bodies. And this coming from society around them, from doctors, sometimes from eating disorder providers themselves. And that is a lot harder. And so I think that's also where the nuance of, what does recovery mean? And I think for those who are in bodies that are, more societally unacceptable right now, unfortunately, it is a lot harder. And we need to think a lot more about how to make the world safer for all bodies.
For all bodies. There's a listener question. Is binge eating still considered a disorder, even if the person is not obese?
Yes, absolutely. And that goes to my point of, there are folks who have binge eating disorder in all body shapes and sizes, just like there are folks who have anorexia in all body shapes and sizes.
When we talked before, I said I wanted to talk about your professional identity and body image and disordered eating. And you said you had never really been asked that question before.
Yeah.
But to me, it's something I think about a lot. How does one's professional identity get shaped around how we look? The control that we put on our bodies to look a certain way.
Yeah.
How does the obsession with what we're eating and how we're taking care of ourselves and exercising affect our work day? Like, to me, there seems like so many intersections there. What are your thoughts? And if there's any personal anecdotes you'd like to share?
I think there's so much there. And I actually think it goes back to the earlier conversation around, just as a society, even for those of us who don't have, diagnosable eating disorders, how disordered our thinking is around food and body and how much time we spend thinking about it. And of course, that's going to show up in the workplace, where that is where we spend the majority of our day, right? And so it makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. And I think a lot of folks are thinking about, as they're trying to climb a career ladder and judging themselves so much on their professional identity, of course that's going to show up. And then you have the added layer of, we know that weight stigma is very present in the workplace. In most states in this country, you can still discriminate based on weight. You can fire somebody based on their weight status. And we also know that there are really unfortunate stats around folks in large bodies get, up for promotion less, they make less money, they're seen as less competent, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are real things there that I don't want to undercut, that are really, really hard and systematic issues that we need to do a lot of work on, both from a policy level, a workplace level, and a societal level. And then we also have, a lot of unintentioned, well-meaning, I think, workplace initiatives around, the lose 10 pounds challenge, the, fitness challenge.
We'll pay for your gym challenge. We'll give you money if you go to the gym.
Let's not eat sugar. And thinking about how many folks struggle with disordered eating in our society, how psychologically damaging that can be for a lot of folks. I think, we also know that, I'll forget the stat, but it's something like as early as, elementary school, young girls are like raising their hands less and asking questions less because they're so self-conscious of how they look. And this is something that affects all genders, but I think certainly given the societal expectations placed on cis women, it tends to show up in an even greater way. And I think that just doesn't stop and only intensifies. And so, of course, in the workplace, we're thinking about how we look and how we present, and how much is holding us back. And look, even now, usually sometimes we're on Zoom so much, and so I will typically hide my self view because it's distracting. It's like I don't want to be looking at myself the whole time. I don't know how to do it on this screen, and so I'm a little bit distracted, But I think we're in such a culture that we're constantly judging ourselves based on what we look like, and that takes away from the really important things of what is my work product, what's coming out of my mouth, what are the things that I'm contributing to. But it's ubiquitous.
It's distracting. I mean, if there was one word I could give it, it's distracting. It takes up so much real estate in your brain. I want to talk about control. I think that again, when I spoke with Melissa Gerson, she noted sometimes that disordered eating can be cyclical, right? And is obviously triggered by events in our life, feelings that come up, issues. And I think that for many of us, it feels comfortable, I know for me, to control my food when life feels uncontrollable.
Mm.
And so in times of extreme stress, for me at least, I will restrict and I'll overexercise and I will just like hyper focus, right? It's that amazing. If I could apply that hyper focus to writing my next book, it would be amazing.
Exactly. 100%.
Does anyone in the audience relate to that too? I'd love to hear from you.
I think you're so right. And I think the reframe that I would put on it is it's really about ramping down that anxiety. I think for many people, it is when life gets stressful and moments of anxiety ramp up, it is a very good coping mechanism. Like to your point, eating disorders and disordered eating serve a purpose. They serve a function. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing them. And so it's a nice way to initially ramp down that anxiety. Unfortunately, these behaviors become compulsive, take on a life of their own. And actually, while you feel like you have more control, you end up not having as much control. These become something that become almost habitual, and it's hard to break out of that habit loop and get out of it. And we also know, again, back to my point of, when you are malnourished, your anxiety ramps up. So you think you're doing a better job at controlling your anxiety, but actually your anxiety is ramping up, which is making you feel like I need to do this more and more. So it's this odd feeling of this, I have control over this, where you're actually losing more control the further down the rabbit hole you go.
It's so confusing. And I will say anecdotally, and this may be the culture I inhabit, but being thin gets a lot of accolades. And so you get that reinforcement as well. So you're like, well, maybe I'm doing something right. Maybe I should keep doing this, right? Because externally you're getting feedback.
Yeah. People talk about that all the time, where when they were at their sickest is when they got the most compliments and praise from folks around, which is just so confusing and so traumatic and harmful, because it's like, okay, this is so reinforcing to the disorder. And when I finally decide to recover, I sort of lose all that praise. And again, for folks in large bodies are often, met with a lot of criticism that they have to fight on a daily basis in order to stay well.
Rachel says, I'm the opposite. That's good. It's been helpful for me to have compassion. Yes, compassion around the coping mechanism. I love that. Compassion around the. As we round out, I want to talk about being at work. 2 questions. One, what are your recommendations? And I guess work from home has changed this for if you're really struggling with this stuff, how to make work feel less triggering, safer, and then also if you're a colleague to someone who has an eating disorder, who has really poor body image. How can you show up as a good colleague?
Oh, I love those questions. So, the first thing I'll say is that I hope we see a lot more companies starting to be cognizant of these issues, given that they're so prevalent and given that so much of our culture around weight loss is so incredibly toxic. And so, we at Equip come into companies and we'll host, talks around how to make workplaces safer for folks and less infused with diet culture and fighting some of these biases that really hurt all of us. But I would start by, talking with a trusted person. Hopefully you have an HR team that is, compassionate and you feel like you have someone you can go to, and just talking about, hey, some of these things that are occurring in the workplace are actually really triggering to me and really detrimental. And you might not be thinking about it in this way, but the statistics show that they're probably pretty triggering to a lot of people. And I think that's when you can start to
like what are some examples of things that are,
I think some of the things we talked about around, let's, well, there are some companies that, will pay you more in benefits if you reach a certain like a BMI level. There are company-wide, fitness challenges. There are company-wide, dieting challenges, lose 10 pounds, things of this nature. And then even, casual talk around, oh, I'm being so bad. I'm eating XYZ, just the things that we say constantly in life. She looks so good. She's lost weight, that really do reinforce this thin ideal that can be really damaging and really triggering for people. So that's the first thing I would say. Also, I mean, if you need support, I would absolutely, if you feel like you need support, you are worthy of support, you are deserving of support. And I would also say the sooner you reach out for support, we know that the quicker you will get better. And so talk to your HR folks about that. A lot of companies have resources and can get you connected with help and support, because you don't need to live like this forever with your brain constantly being a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 around food and body. You can create a much more compassionate brain space for yourself with good access to help and proper treatment. And then to your second question, I would say, if you're concerned about somebody in your workforce, talk to them. It is often the case with eating disorders and disordered eating that a lot of folks distance themselves from folks. And a lot of people around the person who is struggling are often worried, but thinking like, I'm not the person to intervene. I'm not close enough with them. And everyone thinks that. And so nobody does.
How can you do it though, in a tactful way that doesn't cross people's boundaries? I mean, that's a hard conversation.
It's a really, really, really hard conversation. What I typically encourage is staying away from, I'm worried you've lost weight, or your eating patterns are weird, or you're skipping lunch. Like, stay out of the behaviors, anything that is like look wise, and really just approaching it more from a, hey, like, you seem a little bit, off lately. Like, I want to make sure everything's okay. You're smiling less. You're usually the, the one who's cracking all these jokes in the break room. And, like, I see that less and I miss it. And I just want to check in and make sure everything's okay. I think really reminding folks of, again, when you get into a place of disordered eating, your personality starts to really shrink and go away. And that's the thing that's actually motivating for folks to want to get out of this and want to change. And so I think approaching it from that lens, and then just saying, like, I'm here to talk. Like, we've all been through stuff, really sharing your own vulnerability, because even if it's not around this issue, we've all had hard times. And it really helps when you can share that you struggled, you've had a hard time, and you're a person who's safe and here to talk. And then, making sure that that's not the only time. I think a lot of, again, I talked about how, recovery from eating disorders and disordered eating is ambivalence at best. And so being prepared to continue to be there and continue to show up and continue to offer help and support is, I think, incredibly, incredibly powerful.
That's my mom in the background. I'm at my mom's condo. One question that it occurs to me would be helpful if anyone's out there listening and thinking, God, I've noticed that I've been spending a lot more time shaming myself over eating, or worrying about what I'm going to eat, or restricting. What are the signs that it might be time to get help in terms of your eating disorder or your body image?
Yeah. I think you've made it so simple for me in starting the conversation around the brain space. Like, I think that is really it. How much brain space is it taking up? And, related to that, when does it start to interfere with your life? When are you saying your colleagues are going out for a drink after work and you're saying, no, I can't because I have to go to the gym, or, no, because you're worried about what's going to be served on the table. When you start canceling plans to focus on this, when you won't go out because you're so self-conscious about what you look like, when it starts to impede on your life, that's when it goes from, disordered eating, which, by the way, that's awful as well. Get help with that as well. That's a horrible, you're living in that 5 out of 10 space. I would say, like, everyone should be on the work of moving down on that scale. But certainly if you're finding yourself withdrawing from activities that used to bring you joy, that's when you know that it's time to get help.
What about exercise? How do people use exercise? Exercise is so socially sanctioned, as is clean eating right now. I think one of the things that's really surprising to me is the amount of people that I see restricting by using clean eating. I've definitely done it myself. So would love your thoughts on both of those phenomena, which again are very socially sanctioned.
So socially sanctioned, so normalized. And yeah, it's not actually sexy or in vogue to say, like, dieting is sort of out, and wellness and clean eating and counting macros.
Strong is the new skinny.
100%. It's just diet culture has disguised itself in a more kind of palatable form. But yeah, I think all of that makes it really, really hard because, again, it is so incredibly normalized. I mean, touching on exercise, it was something that, I struggled with. Frankly, I was so young when I was diagnosed with an eating disorder that exercise had never really been part of my eating disorder. And in my recovery, it first became this really healthy, because exercise is, there are some really amazing benefits. Good for folks, right? Like, and I went to, as you mentioned, undergrad at Harvard, and it was very, very normalized, this kind of compulsive exercise. And so, like anything, I know I have a compulsive personality now. I started to engage in it, and I started to engage in it all the time, and it did become compulsive. And I needed to, thank God I had folks around me, and this is where I think community is so important, who knew about my past history and were able to say, like, hey, maybe, like, let's chill it on the running a little bit and go for walks instead, and like pull me back from it, which is really helpful. But I think that has been a really, really hard place because, we often talk about eating disorders and disordered eating as being so, so challenging because with, like, substance use disorder, for example, you can just abstain. You can't abstain from eating and exercise. Like, you have to figure out a way to live with it. And so I think it's really a period of trial and error for me. And I think for a lot of people who do struggle with compulsive exercise, you do need to sort of, like, give yourself a break and kind of force yourself to take a break from it to almost reset. I think that's really important and really, really hard to do. For me, it was like a 2-week, all I'm going to do is, like, go for, leisurely walks, and then really reset my relationship where, now a lot of my exercise schedule involves yoga and Pilates and still, like, lots of walking and things that actually bring me joy and are a lot less, high intensity. And, again, I think it goes back to, does it get in the way of your life? Whereas before, if I went on a work trip and it was, like, packed and I couldn't exercise for 3 days, that would, like, really get me into a tizzy. Now it's okay. Now it's like, look, I have, a packed schedule from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm not going to freak out about it. And I think that's where the difference is when you're, again, canceling, plans and things that you need to do. I think that's where you sort of know this is leaning into problematic territory. And this is where it's really helpful also to, like, talk to others, certainly third-party professionals, but also people around you, to get a gut sense of, like, is this feeling compulsive to eat? You know, it's really hard, I think, when you're in the moment struggling
Yeah.
in this culture where it is so normalized to realize that it is problematic. But I always go back to this, like, is it interfering with my life? Is it taking up more brain space that I want? And is it causing me to say no to other things? And I think that's similar with, like, you know, you think about the intermittent fasting, clean eating. Is it causing you to, like, not engage with your friends? Because I think we need to think about health much more broadly of, in many ways, it is way healthier to go out for happy hour with three best friends.
And it's really hard when you're on that regimen, right? And it asks you, it also, I mean, the thing, this is getting off topic, but it asks you to ascribe to a subculture that is very focused around the goal, which I think it can fulfill great community, but can also take you out of your everyday life.
Yeah. And I think there are great fitness communities that you can find that are not focused on weight loss and, like, you know, leaning down, and you know, are more about feeling empowered in your body, feeling strong, you know, don't have a weight loss focus at all. So I think really, you know, being intentional at the very beginning and sussing out if this community is going to be healthy or harmful for you.
Yeah. I will say, and we're past our time. I just want to ask you a couple more questions, but I will say for me, just and thank you for your comment. Very triggering things like at the gym when certain ladies come up and say, "Oh, if I had your body, I wouldn't even need to come to the gym." Makes you uncomfortable. Yeah. For me, my mantra has sort of become, have I moved my body in a way that's helpful today?
Yeah.
And like, if I get upset at myself for eating something that I'm not supposed to, I will say, I just literally give myself some self-compassion, and then like, have I moved my body in a way that is helpful? But it's a struggle. I would love you to share any resources that you feel people can connect with right now, if this is something they're thinking about. And also just, you know, is there kind of therapy? Like if it's this brain thing, if it's the compulsions, the ruminations, like what kind of therapy have you found has been really helpful?
Yeah, there's so many resources, which is the great news of it all. Like, help is available, and this does not need to be a life sentence. You can absolutely move that, you know, needle down and have a lot more brain space for more important things. So I would say certainly, you know, there are therapies that we know are really helpful for this stuff. So CBTE, enhanced cognitive behavioral therapy, a really, you know, structured kind of cognitive behavioral therapy that's individualized for every person, and does reinforce kind of fighting these societal ideals around the thin ideal, and, you know, the idea that enforcing the idea that healthy people come in all shapes and sizes, really psychoeducation around the impacts of malnutrition and how counterintuitive that'll be. So that's really, really helpful. EET is one of my personal favorites.
Me too.
Just so many skills that are helpful in so many moments throughout life, disordered eating and beyond. And then really a lot more work. I talked about family-based treatment being really helpful for adolescents and young adults, but there's emerging research on really incorporating that for the adult population, just understanding again that, you know, so much of this is so hard, and you are actively fighting with yourself and the culture constantly. And so having people around you, having community around you is really helpful. And so certainly at Equip, we're incorporating all of these elements into our treatment approaches. And as I mentioned, opened our doors to the adult population. So come, you know, seek out help. We have a lot of free resources and blogs and guides. Love Project Heal, the nonprofit that I started and talked about in terms of resources, education, and then some kind of more self-help educational resources. If you're kind of dipping your toes in the water, Christy Harrison has written just some beautiful two books, actually, you know, about diet culture and the wellness trap, really helping people to rethink some of these topics that we've all been incredibly ingrained in. Virginia Smith recently wrote a book called Fat Talk.
I love that book.
Parenting through diet culture, and how, some of the things that we don't think about can be really harmful and reinforce some of these biases and some of this weight stigma. They both have, incredible pages as well to follow, and just a wealth of resources and self-help tools. So definitely recommend those as kind of starting places.
Thank you. My last question is a little personal, but, and if so, is just how is being pregnant a huge deal given what your body has gone through? I mean, does it feel?
Yeah, no, it's lovely. And I feel so grateful that, I've done so much work to get to this place. Certainly just in general, like, to have my body be able to carry another human and make another human. And I think that has given me just a new appreciation for how incredible our bodies are and how much they can do. And then also I feel very grateful to have had a really, easy time with body image, and actually be really like embracing of this new chapter of my life and this new form that my body is taking. And grateful that I am in a place where I can really listen to and tune into my body. I think you really need to be able to do that in pregnancy, to be able to listen to, I need to nap. Like napping was never something that I did until I got pregnant, but you certainly need to be able to do that. And also have, I think, just a humility around, what's going to happen next. I think that in many cases, the kind of postpartum period is harder for a lot of people than the pregnancy period. And I've been so lucky to have such a strong pregnancy period, but just knowing that, I am not someone who can ever get involved in, lose that weight after the baby, or, going into negative caloric deficit would really be harmful for me. And so, I am optimistic that I've done so much work and really embraced, like, I'm a mom now, and my body is going to be different. And like, also have humility that these disorders are powerful, and our society is powerful.
Oh, and the comments, people feel so free to make comments.
Oh yeah.
It's weird.
Oh yeah. It is really, really, really odd. And then I think related to that, being able to, kind of more outside of the body image realm, but really take a full maternity leave, and like step back. I mean, I can't remember, not that taking 3 months is going to be a vacation with a newborn, but like, I can't remember the last time that I didn't work for 3 months.
Yeah.
I think maybe middle school. And so, to be able to really give myself this time and space and step back and have sort of another identity, that is not so tied up in just like productivity and work, I actually think is going to be a really, wonderful thing on my own kind of continual journey towards self-healing, self-compassion, and slowing down.
Well, I wish you all the best, and I thank you, and I thank everyone for your time, and see you soon. I'm going to end the broadcast.